everyone, and welcome to Grow Without the Grind. We're really glad to have you here today. This session is all about people who work in or alongside charities, feeling the pressure and wanting to keep everything moving, but often not having the space to think or not having the capacity to do that. So it's absolutely not about telling charities or freelancers what you're doing wrong. We're not here to do that. But we are going to be slowing things down today, and just enough really to give you an opportunity to talk honestly about support, when it helps, when it doesn't, and how to use it really well. So for those who don't know me, I'm Bethany Helliwell-Smith. I've spent my career in the charity sector, first as a freelancer and now as the founder of Owen Coaching. And through my work, I support charities and freelancers to build ways of working that allow them to do their brilliant, impactful work without burning out in the process, most importantly. And today, I'm really pleased to be joined by fundraising consultant and coaching client of mine, Analiese. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you. Morning, everyone. Really nice to see you here. Nice to see some familiar faces as well. My name is Analiese Doctrove. I have worked in the charity sector for nearly 19 years in-house, and recently made the transition to freelance. I've worked for organisations from grassroots charities up to kind of national children's charities, and now as a consultant, my focus is to work with small to medium-sized charities in the kind of fundraising space. So thanks for having me here today.
Amazing. Yeah, so we've both got experience of in-house and as freelancers, and we've experienced that kind of pressure of coping culture that we're going to talk about today. So yeah, we've both seen the difference really that the right help from external support can make. And the damage also that the wrong kind can cause. So that's what today's about. It's not outsourcing everything. It's not about quick fixes, but understanding how charities can grow without grinding everyone down in the process. So you'll notice that Grow Without the Grind has been a webinar series now. I think this is 6 or 7. So I wanted to kind of briefly explain what Grow Without the Grind is, because it shapes really in the lens that we're bringing to today's conversation. So it's a free monthly webinar series that I host that creates space to talk honestly about what sustainable work looks like in the charity sector, particularly around fundraising, leadership, and freelancing. So every session explores a different theme. So far, we've covered things like building supporter and client relationships that feel good. We had a session on how fundraisers can build healthier, more sustainable careers. And the last one was on around making AI work for your fundraising and your well-being. All of the previous sessions are available on my YouTube channel and the speaker page of my website. And the common thread running through all of them is that we're interested in growth that's thoughtful and ethical, not growth that relies on people quietly carrying too much. So today's conversation with Analiese is absolutely sitting squarely within that. We're exploring how external support can genuinely help charities to thrive without burning people out in the process. So before we go any further, I'd love to pause and bring you into the conversation. I've got the lovely Sarah here keeping an eye on the chat today. So if you've got any questions throughout that you want us to answer, pop them in the chat and she's going to gather those up for the Q&A at the end. But if you're comfy, I'd love to know a word or a short phrase in the chat about what kind of best describes how work's feeling for you right now. So we've got heavy, hectic, another hectic. Got twins there. So heavy and hectic, overwhelming. There's no wrong answers here, guys. Don't overthink it. Yeah, heavy, overwhelming. Okay, there's definitely common themes coming out, isn't there? So whatever you've written there, thank you. this is the reality that we're all starting from. So we're not talking theory and strategy here. We're talking lived experience and really thinking about this in the context that you are all working in. So thank you for sharing that. So why does this conversation matter today? Well, firstly, I think it's important to name that context that we're all working in. Across the charity sector, we're seeing the same patterns again and again. Teams are stretched thin, leaders are carrying far too much, and fundraisers are trying to be everything to everyone. Most charities aren't failing, they're just about coping. And coping can look like resilience on the outside and it can be praised, but actually quietly eroding clarity, confidence, and capacity underneath that. So today is about naming that reality without the judgment. So we're going to be looking at, by the end of this session, having a much clearer understanding of what external support genuinely adds value and when it doesn't. Hopefully by the end of the session today, you will feel more confident, challenging the belief that needing support is a sign of, in any way, failure, and be able to distinguish between needing more capacity and needing more clarity, because those are very different. So if you're taking a kind of a theme throughout the session today, start thinking, does my organization perhaps need clarity or capacity? And as a freelancer, do I offer clarity or do I offer capacity? Then I will hope by the end of the session you will understand what good support actually looks like in practice, whether that's as a consultant, freelancer, coach, or interim. And then hopefully you're going to be also gaining that practical insight into building boundaries, trust, and collaboration that feels steady and productive and not adding more or draining you more. And this isn't about adding another action or framework to your to-do list today. It's about helping you think more clearly and more calmly about collaboration. So if nothing else, we hope today that you leave feeling less alone in the weight that you're carrying and can start thinking about other ways in which this can work for you moving forward. So I want to start by naming the reality that many charities and freelancers working alongside them are operating within right now. And you mentioned in the chat words like challenging, confusing, precarious, exciting, daunting, overwhelming. A lot of people will feel very familiar to the way that you are feeling right now. Across the sector, we are seeing teams and independent freelancers and consultants feeling, who are deeply committed, highly capable, and are just stretched incredibly thin. In practical terms, that can often look like income responsibility sitting with very few people inside organizations. It can look like senior fundraisers or leaders holding significant risk. Freelancers, it can look like carrying delivery expectations without always having full visibility or decision-making power. That can be a really tricky position to be in. Fundraising growing or changing faster than the systems around it. I'm sure that's happened to a lot of people in the room. And then very little space for anyone to step back and actually think strategically. I can think back to the start of my career and we'd have regular away days. We'd get out of our day to day and really think about what it is that we're doing. And that's something that's seen sometimes as a luxury now, isn't it? To give it that time to think. So it's important to say that this isn't about people not doing good enough at their jobs. It's about context and about pressure that builds gradually over time. Inside charities, this pressure often becomes normalized and, like I said previously, praised if it's looking like resilience. People might tell themselves, this is just a busy period, we'll get through this campaign and then it'll calm down. Anyone said any of these? We don't have capacity to stop and rethink things right now. And if freelancers often are telling themselves, and me, I've been there myself, I just need to support them through this phase. If I step back, I'm letting them down. It's not my place to question this. So there's a lot being said in our heads that perhaps we're not comfy saying out loud. And those moments of just getting through are stacking up. And what I've seen again and again is that very capable people, whether you're in-house or freelance, end up carrying far more than their role was ever designed to hold. Not because they want to, but because they care and they feel like they have no other choice. And this is often the point, really, isn't it? Where the idea of external support comes up, not because something's failed, but because the way of working has become unsustainable. And you're suddenly thinking, how are we going to be able to do this? We're going to need to get someone else to come in. So before we talk about how support can help, it's important to really acknowledge what happens when people feel they have to cope all on their own. And that's something that I call coping culture. So many of the words that you shared in the chat earlier are about how, work is feeling right now. It's almost universal across the sector that everyone is feeling like it's a challenging time. And that's why coping culture isn't about people lacking resilience. In fact, it often looks like resilience on the surface, but it sounds like we'll get through this busy period. We'll just need to get to the end of the month. It's not ideal, but it'll do for now. Has anyone been there? And most of the time, these statements are completely understandable. If you are comfortable, I would love you to pop a word or a short phrase in the chat if any of these feel familiar or if you've said something similar. Because often when we see coping, it starts as a kind of short-term strategy, doesn't it? Something people use to get through a tricky patch. But the challenge is when coping quietly becomes the default way of working. And I think since 2020, we've all been running at a speed that we perhaps thought would be temporary. And the people that I'm working with, almost, what are we, 6 years on, are almost still working at that pandemic pace. We've not had a chance to stop, slow down, reassess, and get back to our ways of working that were pre-pandemic. And when this happens, organizations can find themselves constantly reacting rather than redesigning. They can find themselves firefighting rather than planning and carrying a lot of unspoken about strain. And again, this is not criticism. It's about very human response to pressure, care, and responsibility. But over time, coping can mask the need for change, and it can make very capable people feel like they're always slightly behind. So in the chat, I'm noticing people coming through saying this feels very familiar. September to December, always very full on. And I think January will be quiet, and it never is. Yeah, the run up to the financial year is always a bit of a shock, isn't it? We kind of think, oh, just get to Christmas, just get to Christmas. And then we think, oh, January, oh, end of financial year. It's like the speed bump we weren't expecting every year. So I think, yeah, words that come up always are busy, stretched, juggling. And that's really common. That's something that tells us how common this is really. And this, as I said, is often the point where conversations about support start to feel uncomfortable, because when coping becomes normal, anything else can feel risky. It can feel like you're putting your head above the parapet and going, I need a bit of support here. And it can feel like a personal failing. But before we kind of talk about these solutions, I think acknowledging what coping costs emotionally, strategically, financially even. We all know that the bottom line speaks louder than all of the rest of those things. Even when everyone is doing their very best, it can cost an awful lot. So the cost of constantly coping isn't always obvious straight away. it doesn't usually look dramatic. It's quite subtle occasionally. Well, most of the time. It shows up as decision fatigue, having to make too many choices with too little thinking space. I'm sure you've said, I spend so much time in meetings, I don't get the chance to actually do the work that comes out of those meetings. Lots of nods. That's definitely a sign that you're kind of carrying too much. And it also shows up in missed opportunities, right? So not because people aren't capable, but because no one has the headspace to spot them. And that can be really damaging in something like fundraising, where you might have had an email from somebody that might be interested, or a donation, a small donation from somebody, but you didn't have the time to look into that donation. And they were actually a major donor potential. And so the cost of carrying too much really does have financial implications as well. It shows up as fundraising that feels heavier than it should, campaigns that take more energy than they used to, planning that feels rushed, or strategy that exists but is in the digital version of a dusty drawer and just isn't revisited very often at all. And over time, can become fragile, not because the team isn't talented, but because no one has the breathing space to step back and design something steadier. When leaders and fundraisers are constantly holding everything together, there's very little room for thoughtful redesign. And that's where having someone come in with a fresh pair of eyes can be really, really helpful. There can be a shift from short-term survival strategy to becoming a long-term structural risk if it's not taken care of. And this is often the moment when the question of external support starts to surface. So I'm going to hand over to Analiese now to talk you through the beliefs underneath all of this, because there's so much that we see in the sector in our positions, isn't there, Analiese?
Yeah, thanks, Bethany. And I resonate with so many things that you've talked about, and so many of what people were sharing in the chat as well. It's definitely, we're seeing that across the whole sector. So I suppose the other takeaway is that you're not alone in this, and that we're here to kind of really recognise that this is a heavy place to be at the moment. But
Mm.
so looking at this support, the kind of failure, the belief sits really quietly underneath of so much of what we see in the sector. And many leaders carry an unspoken story that says, if we ask for help, we're not good enough. Support doesn't mean that something has gone wrong. It usually means that something has grown, something's changed or become more complex than it used to be. And
Mm.
often, when income grows, when services expand, when risk becomes higher, it is entirely appropriate that the way that you work evolves too. So support is not a confession of failure at all. It's often a sign of maturity. Um, it's a sign of growth. Support is normal. It's very good governance. And support is how we grow without grinding people down and burning teams out. So from a fundraising perspective, asking for support is often a sign that an organisation is taking its responsibility really seriously, that it's not failing. And if you're responsible for bringing income into an organisation, protecting that income stream with the right support is a really good leadership decision. So there is something here that we haven't named yet and we haven't talked about, and it is really important, and that's budget. Because often the biggest hesitation around external support isn't the belief that, it doesn't work or whatever, it's money. And charities are used to being careful with our funds. That's what we're here for. We're here to put our money back out for our beneficiaries and the communities that we support. Every pound has a purpose. So bringing in external support can feel like a really big risk. You might hear from both sides of the coin. If you are a freelancer or a consultant, or you're somebody in the charity sector who needs support, you might hear, we don't have the budget, or is this really the right time? What happens if it doesn't pay off? Freelancers are expensive. And those are really valid concerns. They're very valid. But there is often a part of this conversation that is missing, and that is, what is the cost of not investing? If decision fatigue is slowing progress, if fundraising feels fragile, if senior staff are at the risk of burnout, that also carries a cost. So we frame this as risk management. There is a financial risk in investing in support, and there is a strategic risk in continuing without it. So the question isn't, is this risky? The question is, which risk are we more comfortable holding? And that can feel like quite an uncomfortable question. But which risk are we more comfortable, holding? Sometimes the highest risk is assuming we can continue indefinitely in a system that's already under a lot of strain. And you've really shared that in the chat. We can see the strain. So this investment in external support isn't just about return on income. It's about return on clarity. It's return on sustainability. It's return on protecting your people and your teams. And that is why choosing the right support really matters. Because thoughtful investment should reduce risk, not increase it. So external support works best at very specific moments, and you'll hear lots of ways that external support is described, but it's not something that charities need all the time. And it's not a magic fix, although we would love it to be. But there are patterns that I've seen time and time again where it genuinely adds a lot of value. So, for example, when fundraising has grown faster than the systems around it, when income targets have increased, but processes, reporting, or team structure haven't evolved alongside them, when senior fundraisers feel isolated, holding a lot of responsibility without space to think things through with someone impartial or external, and when strategy exists, but it isn't actually being used day to day. I think we're probably all a bit guilty of that. Or when everybody is incredibly busy, but income still feels really fragile. So these are often signals that this is not about effort, and we said that right at the start of this session, but it's about structure. And this is important because good external support doesn't replace teams. So it doesn't swoop in and take over. It strengthens what you already have, and it brings clarity, focus, and confidence to your team. So sometimes the biggest shift isn't a new fundraising idea, it's helping a team prioritize properly and stop trying to do everything at once. That clarity alone can increase income, well-being, and supporter care. And when that kind of clarity starts to land, something shifts, not just operationally, but emotionally too. So this is where we talk about the difference between capacity and capability. When things feel stretched, the instinct is often, we need more people, we need more hours, we need another pair of hands. And sometimes that is true. Sometimes that can be completely true. But often the real gap isn't capacity, it's capability. So capacity is about volume. So how much work can physically get done? What can we achieve? And capability is about clarity. How well is that work structured, prioritized, and aligned? So a really good example of this, I worked for a national children's charity called Buttle, who do brilliant work in the child poverty space, and was developing an individual giving program. The question initially could have been framed as a capacity issue. We need more income, we need someone reaching our supporters more regularly. But when we took a step back and we looked at it properly, the issue wasn't volume, it was clarity. So we had to ask ourselves some questions. What is individual giving actually going to do for our organisation? Who is it speaking to? How does it connect to our fundraising goals? And what are we trying to move people towards? Once we had that strategic clarity in place, the output became much lighter and more focused. The team didn't just do more, we worked to refine and develop our systems to ensure that we were fit for purpose and ready to move forward. And then we could do things right, and we could do them much more consistently. So that was the difference. It wasn't about more activity, it was about better alignment. And when teams stop trying to solve clarity problems with capacity solutions, pressure often reduces. So there's lots of different kinds of external support available. There's freelancers, consultants, coaches, interims, project-based specialists, and they all serve a really different purpose. So the question isn't simply, should we get help? It's what kind of help do we actually need right now? So a freelancer might be the right fit when you need delivery and capacity, more capacity. A consultant would be helpful when you need support on strategic direction or systems redesign. A coach can support thinking and decision making. An interim can stabilize something temporarily during a transition. But if we don't diagnose the need properly, we can end up buying the wrong type of support. So good support is about clear scope, boundaries, and clear outcomes. It doesn't promise to fix everything. It defines what it will and won't do. And the won't do is almost as important as what it will do. So before bringing someone in, it can really help to ask yourself, what problem are we actually trying to solve? Is this a clarity issue or a capacity issue? What would success look like in 3 to 6 months? And how will we know if this has worked? When those questions are clear, external support feels less risky because it's intentional, not reactive. And even with the right type of support, things can unravel if boundaries aren't clear from the start.
Thank you. That's so important, isn't it? That clarity versus capacity piece. I wonder if anyone in the room today has ever been in a situation where you've sought the wrong kind of support, perhaps where you've gone for capacity and actually needed clarity, or vice versa. I'd love to know. But I'd also like you to invite you to spend a moment reflecting on this question. What changes when we stop carrying it alone? When leaders, fundraisers, or freelancers stop holding everything themselves, something shifts, and I've seen it time and time again in my coaching sessions. It's not always dramatic, but it is noticeable. So if you've had external support previously, if you're in-house and you hired a freelancer or a coach, or if you are a freelancer in the room today, have you had a coach yourself? Have you been on a training course that was really great? Where did the change happen for you? Where were you able to notice the change when you stopped carrying everything alone? Was it that often it feels like clarity, perhaps? Or was it that you were able to make calmer decisions? Were you more confident in what not to do moving forward? There's a lot that can change. And sometimes the most valuable thing support offers isn't more activity, it's more thinking space. So an example of this is that I worked one-on-one with a charity leader who felt constantly behind, every week felt reactive. And what changed wasn't their workload overnight by any means. It was having structured space to think. Within a few months, they were making fewer decisions, but better ones. They stopped saying yes to everything, and income planning became steadier because it was more intentional. So in the chat, we've got, I always feel more energized and positive after working with the learning group. Yeah, absolutely. Even if you're working on someone else's issues, yeah. That shared burden, isn't it? Very important. I've also worked with I also work with freelancers all the time who kind of realized they were carrying emotional responsibility for outcomes for their charity clients that weren't fully within their control, and that can be a really tricky place to be in. They often feel responsible not just for the delivery, but for internal morale or strategy gaps or even leadership uncertainty. So through the coaching that I do with them, we clarify boundaries and They're able to move from feeling like rescuers to feeling like strategic partners. And that collaboration piece we're going to go into much more in a minute around how best to work together as an in-house team and as a freelancer. That shift often protects both them and the freelancers and their clients. It's really important. In another organization I work with, external support didn't increase the output, it actually paused things, and that can be a really challenging thing to pitch in if you're managing up and you're saying we need help. But together they really noticed that two activities were draining time and not actually generating meaningful or financial return. So that decision didn't reduce ambition, it reduced noise. And that alone created breathing space for both the internal team and the consultants supporting them. So I'd love you to reflect on this question as we go through today. If you weren't carrying this alone, what would feel different? Would it be pace? Would it be confidence, energy, clarity, income stability, healthier boundaries, more shared ownership or shared responsibility, perhaps? Sometimes support doesn't add more, it removes pressure, and that's definitely worth the investment, if you ask me. And once we kind of begin to experience that shift, whether you're a leader or a freelancer, the next question becomes what kind of support actually helps to create that breathing space and that time to think. So we have both in-house teams and freelancers on the call today, and so it's important to say this. Healthy collaboration is absolutely a shared responsibility. Can I get thumbs up if we agree? Yes. It's not about one side getting it right and the other side getting it wrong. Green flags in collaboration can often look like clear expectations on both sides, an agreed scope that what's included, and as Analiese said, most importantly, what isn't included a lot of the time. Scope creep is a real issue at the moment. Another green flag can be open communication, including the ability to say, this isn't working, can we adjust? So if you're in-house and you're working with someone externally, or you're external working with someone in-house, are you having regular catch-ups? Not just to talk about the project and the work that you're doing, but to talk about the ways of working and the collaboration itself, and checking in, is it working for both parties before it rumbles on and gets into a negative place? Another green flag can just be respect for pace and capacity. It can be a really challenging one as an external person to say, why isn't this being done quicker? Because internally they're dealing with multiple fires. So again, clear communication about that is really important. And then a sense of shared responsibility rather than a freelancer or a consultant coming in to rescue the situation. That can be really helpful. So I can't talk about green flags without talking about red. This can often show up in very different ways. It can be vague expectations, scope creep, where the work quietly kind of expands without being acknowledged. Like, we don't have to stick to what we agreed 6 months ago, but it needs to be a conversation about the scope and about the contract if things are changing, rather than, can you just? Who hears that? Everyone, can you just? Or can we just? Yeah, scope creep is a real issue at the moment. And then blurred roles as well. So not knowing who's responsible for what. Over-promising on the freelancers side, that's a real challenge. Or over-relying on the external person to fix something that's actually systematic in an organization. That can be really challenging because that external person doesn't always have the full picture of what's happening internally. So it needs to be a collaboration if it's something systematic that needs to change. Collaboration should absolutely create clarity. If it's creating confusion, pressure, or dependency, then something absolutely needs to be revisited. And often those red flags aren't about people doing anything wrong or bad people. Like no one sets out in their Tuesday to be a red flag. Actually, it's about unclear agreements. So clarity equals kindness in these situations and in this collaborative way of working on both sides, in-house and external. And this is where collaboration starts to unravel, even when you've chosen the right person or organization, or even when everyone has good intentions. Because healthy collaboration doesn't just rely on goodwill, it actually relies on boundaries. And I'm not going to be the 110th coach to say that you're bad at boundaries, but without clear boundaries, support can slowly creep into scope creep, blurred roles, emotional over-reliance, where difficult internal dynamics get outsourced rather than addressed. I've definitely seen that. Or quiet frustration, like when expectations on either side aren't aligned, it can be really frustrating. And I hear this because I coach in-house and I coach freelancers, and they tell me. I get the behind the scenes view of everyone's frustrations, and I can definitely hear it. It's about that miscommunication a lot of the time. And none of this happens because people are trying to take advantage, or they are bad people, or they set out to be a red flag on a Tuesday. It usually happens because clarity hasn't fully established or been revisited, or things have evolved since you had the initial conversation. A lot of freelancers I work with actually work with organizations for quite a prolonged period of time. Sometimes you're doing 4 days a month for years. And that can mean that things change and evolve over time. So revisiting your collaboration and talking about actually how is this working and what needs to change is really, really important, instead of it just rumbling on and evolving without having those conversations. Boundaries are absolutely not barriers. They aren't about distancing or defensiveness. They're about clarity. They're about protecting capacity on both sides. And they allow freelancers to contribute strategically, not reactively. The freelancers I coach all the time are saying, I'm just having to like firefight for the organization I'm working for because this is coming up and this is coming up and this is coming up. And I know in-house teams definitely feel the same as well. But when we allow freelancers to contribute strategically, that actually helps the kind of retain the ownership, rather than for the in-house teams to retain ownership of projects rather than feeling displaced. Healthy boundaries might also look like success measurements. Like, are we talking about that when we're having conversations with about the collaboration? Like, what does success look like from this collaboration? It can look like agreed communication rhythms. So if you're saying to a client, if you're a freelancer, I'm going to work 4 days a month for you, what does that actually look like? And I'm all for flexible working. I'll bang that drum till the day I die. But if your client doesn't know if you're going to work on the first, second, third, and fourth, or if you're going to do 1 day a week for the whole month, there's definitely a misalignment there, isn't there? Those conversations need to be had. And also defining decision-making authority. So I work with a lot, I can't stand it myself, but I work with a lot of freelancers who do trust fundraising. Definitely not my bag, but maybe that's why they come to me, because I'm the opposite, maybe. But what they find really challenging a lot of the time is that they don't always know where sign off lands, or how long that process is going to take, or who presses submit at the very, last minute when there's a deadline. Like, those things need to be part of a conversation. So regular check-ins to ask, is this still serving the outcome we agreed? This is where collaboration is really, really important. You might have chosen the right person. You might have even, have all the best intentions in the world, but relying on boundaries and having that clear communication is really, really important. So let's have a think about what happens without boundaries. It can be things like projects kind of getting derailed. It can look like you know, making sure that you're yeah, it can be things like having too many meetings. I've worked with quite a few freelancers who are almost being treated like in-house. They're being treated like one of the team. And that can be a lovely thing to say to a freelancer. And they can be like, oh, I feel like part of the team. But actually, what you start to do is give them all of the same problems that your in-house team has, and you're unloading all of the bureaucracy and all of the team meetings that come with being an in-house member of staff, and you're then stopping that freelancer from having the impact that they could have. So from a freelancer perspective, for those of you in the room, if a client says, you're part of the team, you're part of the family, it's at least an amber flag, even if it has very good intentions. Um, so let's have a think about healthy boundaries. They really are very, very important. And we're going to go into kind of what good collaboration can look like next. So Annalise, what have you what have you seen in terms of good collaboration?
Well, yeah, thank you. And again, so many of those things you just said, I was like, oh yeah, I've definitely been in that situation.
Yeah.
So healthy, good collaboration should feel like partnership. It's not rescue. And I think that distinction really matters. So when collaboration turns into rescue, something becomes really unbalanced.
Mm,
Either the freelancer feels responsible for the outcomes that usually would sit within an organization, or the in-house team begins to rely on external support to hold things that need internal ownership and oversight. So good collaboration feels different. It includes clear ownership on both sides. Everybody knows what they're responsible for. It includes regular, honest check-ins, not just updates, but real conversations about how it's going. Agreed outcomes so that success isn't vague, and permission to say, this isn't working as we'd expected. Can we adjust? Or the
mm,
ability to adjust. It's a real sign of strength, not failure. Um, and I've worked with some great organisations. I've recently done some work with somebody who, from advertising the position to their kind of interview process and agreement on scope of work, it was really led by collaboration and partnership. I knew exactly what I was entering into as part of that conversation. They were very clear about what they wanted from a relationship with me, and I was able to provide the right information and updates along that journey. It definitely supported the internal team to feel much more confident, not displaced. There was good learning for them as well. I felt respected and not overextended, and it supported us to build capability inside the organisation so that they could take the project forward and really use it as it had been intended. It didn't create reliance on me to deliver that for them in the long term. So the goal was always about handing those things over, and it was to strengthen what was already there, which was really important.
amazing. Yeah, I can remember us talking about that in your one of your coaching sessions we had recently. It sounded like a really nice process for you to go through as well when you were applying for that role, and a lot of clarity and clear communication there. Thank you for sharing that. Um, okay, I'd love to invite you to pause here. Not to fix everything at once, just to notice for a second. You don't need to share anything personal in the chat. You can just keep this to yourselves if you want to, or you're welcome to reflect, pop a word or a phrase in the chat for each of these questions. But where are you coping more than you'd like right now? So write some stuff down, pen and paper, feel it. Where are you coping more than you'd like? What feels heavier than it should? And if things felt a bit steadier than they do now, what kind of support would help you breathe? So, where are you coping more than you'd like? What feels heavier than it should? And if things felt a bit steadier than they do right now, what kind of support would help you breathe? It's making me breathe properly. Sometimes we move so quickly in this sector that we don't give ourselves permission to ask those questions. So please, take that and ask yourself that on a, regular basis, monthly basis. What am I, where am I coping more than I'd like to? What feels heavier than it should? It can be part of your reflections at the end of a week, or when you're on your commute or something, just to stop and ask yourself, like, what kind of support would help me to breathe right now, even physically. Sometimes we're so shallow in our breaths. What have we got going on in the chat? I thought you were having a chat with someone, Leanne. Hello, colleague. Awareness is often the first step towards change, right? Doesn't need to be a big overhaul. It's just awareness. So I've definitely noticed themes in the room today around pressure, pace, responsibility, which makes sense given everything we've spoken about today and everything that's going on in the sector. So with this in mind, give yourself regular opportunities in your busy day. You've carved out time today. You've managed to be here for an hour, either live or if you're watching the replay, you're here and you've been with us for almost an hour now. So it is possible for you to carve out some time for yourself to think, where am I coping more than I'd like to? What kind of support would be helpful for me right now? And those questions are relevant if you're an in-house person with budget, without, if you're a freelancer. What kind of support would really help you to breathe and to have that time? So as we close today, I want to leave you with this. The organisations and freelancers who thrive in this sector are not the ones who cope the longest. They aren't the ones who stretch themselves indefinitely. They're actually the ones who choose clarity over chaos. They choose support and collaboration over isolation, and stability over short-term survival. For in-house teams, that might mean recognizing when responsibility has outgrown capacity. And for freelancers, it might mean recognizing when scope or boundaries need strengthening, or recognizing that you don't have to carry outcomes alone. In both cases, that shift is the same. You're moving from coping to collaborating. And while lots of us work at home, it can be really quite isolating, even if you are part of a team, or even if you do have people around you that you speak to. So moving from just coping to actually collaborating can be such a strength. And that seeking external support, whether you're in-house or you're self-employed, isn't a failure. It is an admission that something has gone wrong. It's often the moment things start to feel possible again. It's the moment work feels steadier, my favourite word. It's the moment that responsibility feels shared, the moment that growth becomes intentional rather than reactive and something that's really challenging. And that's what I mean by growing without the grind. Whatever role you hold, leader, fundraiser, freelancer, founder, you deserve to do impactful work without it costing your well-being. So if today has highlighted some areas where you'd like more structure, more steadiness, better working relationships, or just clearer boundaries, I've opened up a really limited number of 15-minute clarity calls that will take what we've spoken about today and put it into some practical next steps for you. I've seen this from both sides. So if you're in-house on this call, let's have a chat about how working with the right freelancer can unlock some things for you. Or if you're a freelancer, let's talk about what kind of support you need to make sure that you're not carrying all this responsibility on your own in your spare room. It's a simple space to look at your specific situation and map out some practical next steps. So if you're ready to move from kind of insight that you've had today into action, I'd really love to speak with you. Sarah, have we got any questions in the chat that you've been gathering?
A couple of people mentioned was that concern over the the workload to bring in external support. I know from being a freelancer myself, that is something that a lot of clients are
Yeah,
concerned about. So might be something you could give advice on.
yeah. Delegation takes time, doesn't it? I think sometimes people forget about that and can actually think that it's going to fix all of their problems. But yeah, it does take time to think about that scope piece. What actually are we looking for in terms of support? How are they going to fit into the team and all of that? It takes yeah, it takes time and resource in itself, doesn't it? But I think sometimes it's about that short-term setup, isn't it? And if that's done really, really well, the long-term impact can be really impactful and beneficial. Have you got any thoughts on that, Annalisa?
Yeah, I think if you're clear on your kind of scope, and we've talked about scope a lot, but if you can say, look, this is the work that we know that needs doing, and this is what we think success looks like,
Yeah,
that's just a really good start for a freelancer. And I've definitely worked with much smaller organizations who have kind of given me that piece of information and given me access to a file and said, here's everything that we think you need. And I
yeah,
might say, right, the first 2 days of me working with you is actually going through that and looking at all this information and then coming back with further questions, further information I might need, depending on what that piece of work is. So it definitely does take time. It is worth getting it right. But if you find the kind of right support that you're looking for, then I'm sure there's a way that you can work through that together as well.
yeah. And also something else I've just thought of is making sure the right person internally is holding the relationship with the
Yes.
freelancer, because it might be lots of nods. It might be that there's a leader who has budget responsibilities, but do they need to be the person that's actually liaising with the freelance on a regular basis? They might be able to pay the freelancer and allocate budget to that, but actually it might be someone else within the team that needs to have the regular communication with that freelancer and build that relationship, and they might have more time to be able to do that and delegate tasks and that kind of thing. I think sometimes there's a bit of a bottleneck, isn't there, if the leader maintains the relationship with the external support. I've definitely seen that. So thinking about who is best placed to hold that relationship is really, really important as well. And as a freelancer, like saying, are you the best person for me to talk to, or is there somebody else that would be better placed for me to email my questions to or check in with on a regular basis? Yeah, for sure.
I think there's just one there about sort of previous bad experiences that
Mm,
people have potentially had, and I think that's really valid.
mm.
You might not have had the right support for the problem that you had, and therefore didn't get the result that you were looking for. So hopefully this session's brought some kind of clarity to that, which we've talked about a lot today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for being here today, guys, and for showing up for this conversation and for the work that you all do. I'm increasingly noticing that leaders and freelancers are asking for spaces where conversations can go deeper, where sustainability boundaries and those practical decisions can be made. If you are interested in kind of taking this to the next level and having a chat about putting this into some practical kind of a practical action plan, then please do book one of my clarity calls. I'd love to take this a little deeper with you guys and have a chat. That you deserve ways of working that support you as much as you support your cause or your causes. And remember that it is possible to do good and be well, everyone. Thank you for being here. And thank you to Annalisa as well.
Thanks for having me. Bye, guys. Have a good day.